The Finding Purpose podcast is proudly brought to you by Relive the Moments, founded by visionary entrepreneur John Lim. We live in a world where it's easy to capture memories, but Relive the Moments makes it effortless to re-experience and share them. From NFC-enabled tap coasters and photo frames to interactive video cards, Relive the Moments turns everyday objects into unforgettable tap-to-experience keepsakes. Imagine gifting a wedding guest a coaster that instantly opens your highlight reel, or giving your event sponsors a custom frame that tells your story with just one tap. Whether you're celebrating a milestone, planning a wedding, honoring a legacy, or elevating a brand experience, Relive the Moments is the bridge between the past and present, between memory and connection. It's not just a product, it's an experience. Visit www.relivethemoments.com and use promo code PURPOSE for 25% off your first order. Let's bring your memories to life, one tap at a time.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Finding Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Adam Vora, and I'm so grateful to have you here. This podcast is all about exploring the journeys of incredible individuals, people who have faced adversity, found their purpose, and are now making an impact in their communities. But it's also about my journey. Over the years, I've faced my own obstacles, moments of doubt, and struggles with identity. Through it all, I found my purpose in giving back, creating a space where people can detach from the negative emotions and stigmas they may associate with their own stories, just like I did with mine. Here, we have real conversations about growth, resilience, and transformation. Whether you're searching for direction, striving for personal development, or simply looking for a place to feel seen and understood, this is for you. So if these conversations resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us on social media. Now let's dive into today's episode.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or watching on the official YouTube channel of the Finding Purpose podcast, thank you for being here. Your continued support through every follow, share, and review means the world. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so we can keep growing this purpose-driven community. Over the last few weeks, we've been incredibly lucky to feature a powerful lineup of women: Diamandia Lingos, Angelique Dawson, Ashley Rodon, and most recently, Natasha Silverbell, each bringing bold stories of healing, leadership, and transformation. If you haven't caught those episodes yet, I highly recommend going to hear the wisdom, strength, and purpose each of them brought to the mic. Today, we continue that momentum with a guest whose work may look different, but whose approach to identity, legacy, and impact is just as intentional. Dudley Rayborn is the visionary behind Sir Dudley's custom clothier, Sir Dudley Bespoke, and for over 25 years, he's been redefining what it means to dress with purpose. Inspired by London's Savile Row and the latest trends from Italy, England, and France, Dudley creates bespoke wardrobes that reflect the essence of the individual, not just their style. His clients include stars like John Eisner and Ryan Cabrera, but it's his ability to help anyone, from boardrooms to red carpets, step into their power through confidence and craftsmanship that truly sets him apart. With access to over 10,000 premium fabrics and a standard of detail rooted in excellence, Dudley's passion for style goes far beyond fashion. He's also a dedicated philanthropist, using his brand to support charitable causes and give back through service. This conversation is all about self-expression, presence, and what it means to lead with authenticity from the inside out. Let's get into it, Mr. Rayborn. Thank you so much. He was also, I'm super grateful that you were a sponsor for the amazing event that we had on May 22nd at the Lamborghini dealership in Greenwich. So, I'm really grateful for, just meeting you right off the bat when I met you in our first conversation, we did that Zoom call. Like you always ask like, what could I do? How could I make this better? And, that immediately spoke to me where I was like, I want to partner with him. I want to work for him. And, having you here, I just want to get to know you better because, the way you carry yourself, I greatly admire.
Absolutely. And it was a great event last night too, by the way. So,
Thank you. Well, it's not going to be last night. This is coming out later. But yeah, we are recording this the day after the event for everybody who's listening. But the funny thing is, I want to know more about you. Like, usually, I'll talk about, like where you came from in your early days. And, let's start there.
All right. Well, I was born in Central Florida. And my parents were raised in Tennessee. And my mom actually, I have two older sisters, and my mom actually used to make our clothing. So, it's the old-fashioned way where they would buy the pattern and make up the dresses and that type of thing. So early on, I had kind of interest in terms of fabrics and styles and those types of things. And when I went to middle school, you had to take home ec. And when you did that, you had either cooking or sewing. So I took sewing and did a little modeling when I was a teenager, not a whole lot, but just, some fun stuff. And then in the late 80s, I purchased a men's clothing store and did that for about 3 years. And then I had to figure out a way. There's got to be a better way to be a better service to people without having so much inventory. And from there, I into work for a tailor in Tampa, Florida. And basically, I went around the city selling wardrobes to executives. And after that period of time, I basically started my own business doing the same thing.
I love that. And, I didn't know you grew up in Central Florida. For some reason, I thought you were from up here originally and then ended up migrating down there.
No, I was actually Lakeland, Florida, which is where I still live, which is my home base. I do have access to a showroom in New York, so I do travel quite a bit to see clients. And that's the beauty of this business is because we create fabrics, have access to all the fabrics, and we create the pattern, I don't have all that inventory or overhead that typical retail stores do, so I could be of better service to my client. But I do a lot of events, such as the event at the Lamborghini dealership or maybe in New York or the Hamptons, West Palm Beach, done a few things in Newport, California, San Diego. So for me, it's the ability to be able to see my clients when they have a need. And I'm a firm believer that in your clothing wardrobes, less is more, meaning that if you have the right product and the right items so that you can function with your wardrobe, also depending on the season of life that you happen to be in. When I go to West Palm Beach, I don't typically take suit fabric because, they've already been there, done that. They're looking for something different.
So, you were saying that, growing up, you saw your mom, sewing and making clothing for you. Do you have siblings?
I have two older sisters.
Okay. Yeah. And so, that was a really early introduction into style and fashion.
Right.
What was it like growing up and watching her, sew your fabric, and when what was it like growing up in Florida, early on?
Well, my dad was basically a hard labor. We didn't have a whole lot, but we were always got a new outfit for Easter, But basically, it's I've done a lot of different things in my early career as far as working, and sold cars when I was a teenager, and did a little modeling, and then I worked at a bank right out of high school, and then I ended up working for a trucking company, and I was in sales and traveled the Southeast selling transportation.
Wow. Okay. So you tried a few things, but fashion was not what you fell in love with. Obviously, you found a purpose in fashion, and it's become something that you build a global brand around. Oftentimes on this podcast, we talk about the journey, right?
Sure.
And the early journey was, the purchasing of your first fashion store. Talk to me about that decision and what it was like. Obviously, there's, making a big decision like that, and, you didn't know what it would lead.
Right.
Let's talk about those moments.
Very interesting, because I was working for the trucking company at the time, and we didn't have any children yet in our family. And so I went into my boss at the time, which one of the owners of the company, and I said, look, I love working here. It's a great job, have a lot of perks, but there's a men's store that I have the opportunity to purchase. So I'd like to go ahead and do that. But if for some reason it doesn't work out, will you hire me back? And he said, yes, I will. Well, fortunately for me, it did work out to the point to where I was able to do that and then transition into more custom-made services.
Okay. And what were some of the early obstacles that you faced? Obviously you're young, you're, taking over a business.
The biggest obstacle in that particular time was, I didn't have a whole lot of money, and I didn't have as much experience. So the store basically gave me the experience because, we had one vehicle at the time. My wife would take me to the store. She would go to her job. I would spend the day there doing everything from, mopping the floors and putting them at stuff on the mannequins, figuring out what inventory to purchase, what products to carry, because typically there you're buying 6 months in advance. So it gave me a lot of groundwork to be able to understand what happens in the retail environment, which also encouraged me to continue my thoughts and my process. So what I did was in the store, I started doing some custom clothing. And it showed me right there real quick that I could still have product and service to a client, but I didn't necessarily have to have all the inventory and the overhead.
What skills did you begin to recognize in yourself that you excelled in, and what skills did you also begin to recognize that you needed to really build and expand in order to be successful long term?
Well, for me, it was about the community I lived in at that particular time was a very smaller community versus the Orlando and Tampa market. So for me, it was like I can start business here, but if I'm really going to go after the executives, that have the spendable income, I would probably have to move more into, the city environment to where you have more attorneys, more business people, more insurance salespeople, to where people that actually, bought suits and sport coats.
Yeah. Do you remember a moment like during those early years where you were tested and there was that moment of like questioning?
Yeah, there was a lot of those questionings, and it's because simply before, I had never sold custom clothing before, and I had never had custom clothing for myself.
Yeah.
Even though that I always say that the benefit of my style always came from my mom. She was the one always dressing me up and making us look good, so I kind of got that started there. But I remember that when I started selling custom clothing, I had a client that he was my State Farm agent, actually. And, he was about 6'5", and he started buying clothing from me. And basically, this was in the late 80s. And so I went to see him one day, and I said, look, you don't have a nice suit in your closet. You have some sport coats, some shirts, and slacks, and whatever. He said, well, the next time you come back, I'll purchase a suit from you. So obviously, when I delivered the other garments, and again, remember, this is like in the 1986. And so I had picked out 5 or 6 fabric swatches. I knew he was going to buy one suit. So I laid them all out. I had all 4 different looks there, and I had all 4 different price points. And so basically it showed me, he picked out a suit, and this is what he said to me. He said, no, that's not one of those $1,000 suits, is it? Again, 1986. I said, no, it's actually $1,295. But if you don't really want that, it's okay. We can go with one of these other ones. He said, no. He said, just don't tell my wife I ever spent that much money on a suit. And, well, interesting fact there, one of the things that helped me with that transition, I delivered that suit to him 6 weeks later. He enjoyed the fabric so much that he said to me, Dudley, from now on, everything I purchase from you for clothing, for pants, sport coats, suits, I want out of this fabric. Now, that was 4 times more than what he had previously been buying on the price.
That's crazy.
So that showed me that I was trying to sell out of my pocketbook and not being a service to actually to the client.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's something that a lot of, business folk, struggle with, where it's like they're thinking about the X's and O's and numbers and not really
Right.
like, hey, like, am I satisfying the needs of my client? And, like, that's how you generate business, especially for, someone like you who does custom
Right.
clothing. Relationships are really important in what you do.
Yes.
And, obviously from an early age you had, you in your previous work experience, it didn't yield nearly to the demand for just cultivating meaningful relationships with people the way that you work now. Let's talk about that for a second, because relationships, I think, is something that we cover a lot on this podcast. What's your approach to relationships, and what do you think are the most valuable things that you need to bring to a table in order for a relationship to be successful?
Well, first off, a relationship should be that. It should be a relationship. Give you a good example of that. I met an individual that was, at that time, he was the president of Bank of America in New York. He was at a golf tournament in Tampa. I was a sponsor of the golf tournament, and so I was there. And we met, and he said, "Do you ever get to New York?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, the next time you're in New York, call me." I said, "Fine, I can do that." So I kind of waited a week or so. Didn't want to seem too anxious.
Yeah.
and I called him. So we built a relationship. We invited other people to different functions. He invited me. He referred me. But I never sold him any clothing until 5 years later. I was at an event in New York. His wife was there. And she basically said, "Did you ever buy any clothes from this guy?" He said, "No." "Well, you need to buy a suit from him." So for me, it's not about selling products or service to someone. You build a relationship first. The money comes later.
That's very much what I do in my business. Like, I'm young in the business, and I understand the importance of trust in a relationship.
Absolutely.
And, really delivering when you say you're going to. And also, I'm a big proponent of, under promising and over delivering. And, I think that's important, because I never want to put myself in a position, frankly, where, I feel like I disappointed a potential client or partner or whatever.
Right.
What's your approach when it comes to?
Well, first off, you have to have honesty, integrity.
Yeah.
People respect that. You may have different views on life, but if they know that you're being completely direct with them and honest with them, they'll do business with you. Even if it meant that a competitor had a similar product or similar service.
Yeah.
But if you build that relationship first, people will eventually do business with you. Or they'll refer you to someone that they do business with. Now, obviously, during the whole COVID scenario, it was a little tough.
Of course.
It couldn't travel, couldn't see anybody. So in that particular scenario in the 20s, it was a tough time, because for 8 months I didn't see anybody.
Yeah.
And I couldn't complete garments that I'd already sold to people. So it was one of those things to where you had to give refunds. You had to work with people. They had to work with you. But through that process and through that also opened up some avenues. Yes, I could see a client on a Zoom call if I already had his measurements.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, you got to do the right thing. Because if you do the right thing, whatever that is, you'll always have those additional blessings in life.
what's it like watching the way entrepreneurs move now, especially young entrepreneurs, and seeing this new generation of entrepreneurs where, they're fueled very much monetarily, and it's almost kind of easier for them to make a quick buck if they know what they're doing when they're playing with social media or whatnot.
Right.
Because, you are a business person who built themselves from nothing and did all of that work in the trenches when it came to, like the long-term relationship building, when it came to,
Right.
Physically,
before the whole social
tailoring,
media
yeah,
environment came around,
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you're talking about, a younger generation, and, yes, the technology has increased all of us the ability to communicate and share our stories and our message. But I wonder sometimes, what type of generation are we creating, in the sense that, they really can't think for themselves, or they don't have those long-term life lessons that they might possibly need to really keep them solid as they get older in life.
yeah. I mean, I can agree with that because you see it kind of all the time, obviously, with, artificial intelligence, lately. I mean, I just cooked up the introduction by plugging in like key components about what you did and plugging in an article and generated something. And, like it does make it easier. But at the end of the day, for me, like I lean heavily into just face-to-face relationships, which is why I gravitate towards the event space, because I am all about bringing people together to meet face-to-face. Because, I remember during COVID when everything went to Zoom, right? And like people were doing like happy hours on Zoom and like doing all these things. For me, I found that so weird.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Because it wasn't authentic. You can't read someone's body language. Yeah. You can't see someone from across the room and, have that excitement like, oh my God, like I've been meaning to talk to them. I haven't seen them in a long time. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
Just also like the emotional ride that comes along with, face-to-face interaction. So call me old school as well, but I much more would rather thrive in a face-to-face environment.
Absolutely. And of course, my business, the way it is, typically you're face-to-face, being able to see the individual. I try to find an individual that I find out, not necessarily finding an individual, but I find out where that individual is at in their season of life. Because, yes, sometimes you have first and second, third generation families in terms of, but by being able to find a client where they're at in their season, then I take care of them in that season of life. And sometimes that's at the end of their career, and sometimes it's in the middle, and sometimes it's at the beginning. So I prepare myself to be of benefit to them wherever they're at in their career when it comes to work or clothing.
I love that. Talk to me about the seasons of your life. Where do you think, what were the different seasons that colored your career in your life?
Well, for me, I have been married for 47 years.
God bless.
And, call me old school, but that's
beautiful.
That's who we are. And we were married 9 years before we had our first child. Wow. And I was working for the trucking company at the time, and so we got to travel a lot. And it was like, I can enjoy this because they're paying for it, And then it was, we knew that God had a time, and that basically when that happened, we had our daughter, and then we had our son a couple years later. And then about 6 years later, we had our additional daughter. So, in fact, she's expecting in July the 7th with her first child, so we're pretty excited about that.
Grandpa Rayborn.
Yeah, so it'll be our third grandchild. Yeah. So very active in my church, very active in family. And for me, it's about how can I be of benefit to people? Because if you can do that, if you can serve people, then you'll always have the things that you need in life.
I love that. And 47 years of marriage.
Absolutely.
What's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Esther, just like in the Bible.
Beautiful name.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. 47 years of marriage. And, Wow. What is the recipe for longevity in a relationship?
Well, honesty and integrity is important, but also believing the fact that now the two of you become one. And even though you're going to have tough times and tough financial times and disagreements and arguments and all the things that comes along with life as you get older, you just have to remember that you're joint together. And by doing that, yes, some people say, well, it's a 9-10 relationship. Well, sometimes it's an 80% on one side and 20% on the other side. Then it may be switched the next day. So for me, my beliefs, and it's important that, God gave us females to respect, to add new families to the community. And I think that's important. You have to always respect that, and the fact that even when you have tough times. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't have issues in life and things don't work out, but you should never stop. You just keep going.
I love that. And how has, Esther been such a great partner for you? I love everything you just said, because I think, I don't know, you have that like Southern, just like wholesomeness about you that is like, it's deep and it's pure and it's honest. So when it comes to you and Esther, like building this life with her, what were some amazing moments that you guys shared together?
Well, there was always some of those amazing moments, and then there was always those different moments.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I'm an individual that talks to people, and the limelight, I'm always talking to people and that type of thing. She's not one of those individuals. She likes her garden, she likes her flower garden, so she doesn't want to be in the limelight. But she just celebrated 45 years working for the same law firm.
Oh, God bless.
And so she's still working there, and she's enjoying it. And, we figure that maybe another 3 years or so, so because people ask me all the time, when are you going to retire? And it's like, I don't see anywhere in the Bible where it talks about you reach a certain point in your life to where now you have to retire.
Yeah.
So for me, as long as I have the ability and the strength and the knowledge to keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to enjoy what I'm doing.
That's awesome. And, you're a father of 3. How have you taken the way that you lead and the way that you live your life and done your best in fatherhood to incorporate that? What does fatherhood mean to you?
It's been awesome. And number one, there's a responsibility there, and God gave us that responsibility that when we bear children and we have them in a family, we're to take care of them. Now, there's no recipe for every child. They're all going to be different. But we've always looked to a higher power for direction and vision. And I think if people will focus on that, it'll be a whole lot easier in their life, no matter what they go through. We've had some tough moments and times and trials and those situations, but you just keep going. So my wife supports me, I support her, and we just make it work.
Yeah. No, I love that. And, faith obviously plays a tremendous role in your life.
Big portion, yeah.
Have you always been a man of faith?
Well, I think there's a certain time. Yes, the answer is to answer that correctly would be yes. But for me, my wife grew up in a pastor's home,
mm-hmm.
and I grew up actually with my stepdad from the time I was about 3 years old, and we always was just in church. It was part of our life, and I worked in church. I had taught Sunday school in church. I've been on the board, the financial board in church. I've reached a point now to where it's like I let some other people take those responsibility. But I think that's one of the things in people's lives these days that, they want to just do a Zoom call. I'll go to church today. I'll watch it online. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's still good information and gives you information to digest. But being assembled together for one simple purpose also brings great community and supports one another.
I love that. Yeah. When you talk about the role faith plays in your life, can you tell me a time where you really had to lean into it?
But I remember specifically when I was 7 years old and I was praying at the altar. And, everybody says that, and everybody has different religions and different concepts. But for me, it was like that was the moment when the light bulb went off for me. And it's like, there is a God. There is a reason. There's more to this life. And because I believe it's like when we think about our lifespan here, whether it's 50, 60, 70, 100 years that you're here on this earth, it's just a real small portion of what is yet to come. It's just a small portion. When is that day going to happen? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's only God knows when that's going to happen, and that's when He makes that decision. Then that's when that'll happen.
I love that. It's funny because I've had a very interesting relationship with faith, where early on, my mother is Persian Jewish, my father's Indian,
right.
My girlfriend and every other partner I've ever had has always been Catholic. So I've had like this exposure to, Judaism, Hinduism,
right.
Christianity, Catholicism. And, my understanding is, yes, that having a higher power, a God.
Yes. And it doesn't matter what the name tag is.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? What's important is what's in the heart.
Yeah. But, there are times in my life where I would say that, God turned his back on me, but really, I now understand that I wasn't inviting him into my life.
Correct.
And
we've all gone through those situations in life to where it's like, where are you?
Yeah.
Why did this happen?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you lose a loved one, or a father or a mother and whatever, and it's like, but it basically says in the Bible, everyone is appointed to die at some point. So it's just a matter of time when it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's funny because, I also understand how important faith is to me now. And it really stems from me being a man in recovery and understanding how toxic ego is for me.
Yeah, sure.
And understanding that, I am not that powerful. And
none of us are individually.
Exactly. And I meant and being sure that in those moments where my ego is, flaring up, it's like, no, I got to turn this over to him.
Right.
Because he really has the ultimate decision over the outcomes of what's going to happen. And that, it took some practice, frankly.
It's a daily practice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that, we all go through different situations in life, and it's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? It's like in my particular case where I do travel a fair amount, and it's like, okay, is this a door that God is opening for me, or is this just something I really want to do?
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes to decide which is the right thing to do.
Yeah. For me, I've always looked at it where it's like conscience, and, they talk about, people always say you have a good conscience and a bad conscience. And, to me, God's talking to my good conscience, obviously.
Yeah.
But coming from the family that I came from, who were good people, and both my parents worked hard and they raised me right, I have been provided with the foundation to really be able to trust my gut. And there was those times when there were other vices that were driving the way, where it's distractions, whether it was, something that would cause instant gratification, that when really my gut was telling me, hey,
right.
Probably stay away from that.
Right.
And now, I understand that I actually can trust my gut, which is opened up so many doors, obviously relationships with folks like you and others I've met along the way. But also just knowing that maybe I'm missing out right now on something, but it's okay. It's going to lead to a bigger opportunity.
Absolutely.
Quick break to shout out our sponsor, Relive the Moments. Founded by John Lim, they're redefining how we share memories. From tap-to-play photo frames to interactive coasters, they turn ordinary objects into powerful, shareable experiences. Perfect for weddings, events, or milestone moments. Relive, reconnect, reimagine. Check them out at www.relivethemoments.com. Now back to the show. Do you have a story that you can share with my audience where like there was a time in your life where, you know, you had to make a difficult decision?
Absolutely. You know, when I made that decision to leave a good paying job, expense report, company car,
Yeah.
you know, it was a tough job, but, you know, it was a lot of travel at that particular time when we were also trying to raise a family. That was a hard decision to make because, you know, at the end of the day, it's like you have the 9 to 5, you know what your budget is. And one of the things that's been a blessing in that transition, because my wife has always worked in that 9 to 5 concept, as well as except when she had the children. But knowing that you have support of each other, that always gives me the insurance that, okay, I'm going to buy this store, but if it didn't work out, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like if I have an opportunity to be involved in a foundation or support a particular organization, I deep dive into looking to see what they're all about.
Yeah.
You know, because I want to be part of something that's being a benefit to someone. And but that was probably one of the biggest decisions. The other one I would say was like when COVID happened. You know, I closed my showroom in Lakeland, moved everything to the house, and it was kind of like, do I need to go get my resume, dust it off, you know, or do I what do I need to do here? And there was a time when I actually, in the early 2000s, a friend of mine actually was working for a software company in New Jersey. And he approached me and he said, hey, I need a salesman in Florida. And we both had custom clothing backgrounds. And so we prayed about it and we said, you mean I can go work again and you can pay me every week, every month, you know, but I can still do my clothing on the side. You know, it's like, okay, maybe we should do this. And so I did that and ended up doing real well at the company. And then some organization bought them out and we all had to go back to doing something else. And for me, it was like, I can sell whatever you want me to sell, but it's like, let me go back to what I really know, and that was the custom clothing business. So.
You know, I love that. And, you know, obviously taking the risk when you said making the decision to leaving the job that had security.
Right.
I want to talk about that because that's something I think that always, when you make those difficult decisions, that you are pushing back against something that you know is safe.
Right.
What's your philosophy on that when it comes to taking those type of risks?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, we've all read all the motivational books and all the different things that to encourage you, and you know, 7 Habits and all those different things. We've all done that, and I've always been one of those individuals that would take those informations and try to apply it to my life and to my business as well as family. But again, I tell people, if you look at some of the most successful people in the world, not necessarily the richest people in the world, but all very successful people even some clients that I have, they all have multiple sources of income. Yes, they may have made it big in one particular thing, but they've also invested in other things so that if one thing doesn't work out. Fortunately for me, I've had a very supportive wife that when things were up and down in my life financially, she was always there to support.
Yeah. I love that. when it comes to, being uncomfortable, right? Because like when you're making that decision, right, and you're putting yourself in a place where like this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. What's your mindset like?
Well, obviously the first thing I would do is if once I've analyzed it and tried to look at the outcomes, even though I've tried to determine the outcomes, knowing that I don't really know what the outcomes are going to be. But the first thing I do is pray about it. And if I pray about it, and if I feel that I feel comfortable with it, then I'll proceed. If I've prayed about it and I don't feel like it's the right thing to do, then we do something different.
Okay. You alluded to like some of the folks that you've been lucky to be around, and style, and how they structure their financial portfolios in order to maintain growth.
Right.
What are some things that you observed about the way they carry themselves, or the way they approach problems, or the way that they communicate that stuck out to you?
Well, I would think, again, depending upon what business the line of business that it might be in. But I think that you have to look at people as an individual.
Yeah.
Even as a business, as you have a business, unless you've inherited a lot of money in terms of that part, and your home and those things are taken care of. Mm-hmm. But even in that scenario, they have tough decisions to make. How do I transition and make this money last? So that's generational type money. And I think for me, it's like knowing that probably in the next 5 years or so, I don't have determined the time, but when I might retire. But one of the beauties of being your own boss is you get to determine what you want to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you determine the wrong thing, and sometimes you determine the right thing.
Yeah. It's so funny because, I'm obviously like in an earlier stage in my career, and, I lean on folks like you, who have been through a lot more in their respective entrepreneurial journeys. And what advice would you give to someone early on in their entrepreneurial journey so that they can learn from perhaps some missteps that you might have made that taught you some valuable lessons?
Sure. Well, I think it's important that people have mentors in their life. I think it's important that from a spiritual perspective that you have an individual or relationship with someone that you can share your guts with, and know that it stays there, again, building that community. And by doing that, you'll find that you'll always have someone that you could shout out to. You may not disagree with them. They may not always agree with what you're going through or what you're talking about. But having someone, having a relationship with your partner, your wife is important. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you have to have a relationship with an individual that you can just sound off to. They can be that sounding board to let you go through the whole process. So I think having those mentors in your life is very, very important.
Who are some of your mentors?
Well, obviously, one of the big mentors that I have is my pastor. Now, I'm much older than he is presently, but
presently.
Well, his father was the pastor at the church, and then so the transition happened and whatnot. So, but for me, it's important. Another individual specifically that we've built a great relationship over the last 10 years is Fred Krasny. Now, we came from total different backgrounds, total different businesses, but we just sparked about 10 years ago, and we connected. And basically, it wasn't about me selling him something, him selling me something.
Yeah.
It's almost like a family. It's almost like someone I could pick up the phone at midnight in the middle of the night and call him, and I know he'd answer the phone. So having those people in your life is very important.
I love that. And I think that's so important. I think it's even more valuable when they are very much the opposite of me,
Absolutely.
because they're able to offer things that I wouldn't even think about.
Yes.
So like having contrasting mentors,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the folks who I lean on are very much opposite of me. You know, some
Sure.
of them may be a little more introverted, some of them in a completely different field, some of them just, you know, not at all like me in
Right.
regards to how they
Right.
communicate, or and you know, also in what they find that's important, because something that they might find important that I might not, they bring that to my attention.
Yeah, they
And I'm-
shine a light on something that we might not even have thought about in
Yeah.
terms of our way that we looked at something. And for me, that's real crucial in terms of having those strong relationships. And they're not always easy to find,
Yeah.
you know, because sometimes those relationships go sour or it just wasn't the right fit. But I tell people that you shouldn't stop looking for. And I think once you connect with an individual and if there's a spark there, you just kind of know,
Yeah.
you know, like when we connected, for example, it was kind of like, you know, I heard some stories about you in terms of your lifestyle and transitions that you had. And it's like, you know, here's a guy that was struggling with a particular issue, but, you know, he made through it. He came
Yeah.
through it. He, you know, however that took or however long that took, he didn't stop. He worked through it. So to me, and I love this podcast about purpose-driven because there is a purpose to what we're talking about,
Yeah.
you know, so that people can take little nuggets away from what our life's experiences have been so that they can actually maybe get some help along the way for them.
Well, it's so funny, and I'll tell you a story behind the inspiration of the name of the podcast. You know, I struggled with alcohol for a very long time, and you know, I had tried to get sober very early on in my like early 20s, and I remember one of the first times I ever tried to get sober. I, you know, went to an AA meeting, and I met a gentleman, and he looked me dead in the eye, and he goes, "Consequence-driven sobriety will not get you anywhere. Purpose-driven sobriety is everlasting." And I
Awesome.
remember it was because prior to him walking up to me and saying that, I was complaining about some trouble I had gotten in, and I was talking about impending consequences, and I was really talking about what I needed to do to get things back,
Mm-hmm.
more so what I needed to do to be grounded in this journey of sobriety.
Yeah,
And that's the light he was trying to shine on me.
right.
But that attempt failed. My journey continued.
Mm-hmm.
There were several other attempts to try to get sober, but I always remembered him say that. So when I made the decision, and I don't even want to say made the decision, I think God really made that decision
Sure.
for me, because my own power couldn't get me sober after so many
Right.
different attempts.
Right.
So when God finally, you know, I turned to him in that moment of darkness,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, "Okay, follow me."
Mm-hmm.
I always remembered that gentleman telling me, like, you need to find a purpose in this life. You need to find a purpose behind your sobriety. And for me, I've obviously, you know, I've found it in connecting people and amplifying the voices and journeys of others, because there are so many people who struggled like I did, but there is so much wisdom you can learn just from the people that you meet. In whoever God puts in front of you, you can learn from.
Absolutely. And an interesting fact, my biological father had a drinking problem. And, you know, so obviously my mom and dad separated when I was about 3 years old. And he passed away in his early 40s. And, but so for me, that made an impact on me at that particular time. I remember when I graduated from high school. Now, it's been a long time ago, 1974. But what my biological dad did for me was he bought me a fifth of vodka, you know, and it was like, okay, I get that. He knowing that I didn't drink, you know. but it taught me a lesson at that particular point. I'm not saying that I've never had a drink,
Yeah.
but what I am saying that it was never a focus for me because I always felt like, is this something that, can transition to me
Yeah.
if I let it, And so it just made a really impact with me. Now, obviously, the vodka I threw away, but,
Yeah. I mean, having that exposure early on and seeing the impact that it had, probably on your family, your mother, for sure. Absolutely. Like that's, and
it created a boundary for me.
yes, yes.
So basically, I had a foundation, but I knew where my boundaries were.
Yeah, and you know what? The thing for me personally was a lot of the fear that I had was really imagined, and we, honesty is a huge part of my journey now. Where when you're in the throes of that darkness, you tell yourself, falsities about yourself, and
Sure.
your inner self-talk is very negative, but also the secrets, not
Sure.
wanting to share some of the things, not wanting to share my story. And now when I talk about it openly and I'm vulnerable about it, I understand there's so much power behind it.
Yes.
Because I may be saying something that I don't care if it reaches one listener, if it reaches 15 listeners, whoever it reaches, who's like, wow, like I'm not alone in my thoughts. I'm not alone in my journey.
Right.
God willing, I empower others to,
and that's why it's
do
so
the same
that's
thing.
why it's so important for that message to continue.
It is. It is. And, it's funny because I don't think anybody like 10 years ago would have ever said, would have ever imagined me like sitting here and talking about how faith and how I lean on God and understand, like my own limits, because they saw someone who ran around limitless and arrogant and destructive.
Right.
And now it's, like that wasn't even me, it's like, I'm so detached from that persona,
Right.
and I'm grateful for that.
Right. And I think it's important that people find what their purpose is in life.
Yeah.
And everybody's different, and sometimes it takes a while to get there and find it.
Yeah.
I did a lot of different things before the custom clothing was actually my, pretty much what I do. But for me, it was like I was always very good at selling value.
Yeah.
No matter what the product was, I could sell the value of that. And transitioning that aspect to whatever I decide to do is always important.
Yeah.
Being able to sell the value.
The value is so important. And, that's something where like, folks like you are a dying breed, but folks like you also like can inspire others to understand that like value is super important.
Yes.
Not only in what you sell, but in like how you present yourself, and what you can offer to someone within any scope of relationship.
Yeah.
Another huge thing for me, one of the biggest measures of my life has been gratitude. I think that gratitude is the solution to pretty much all of my problems, because most of my problems start with a poor me thought. Poor me. Why aren't I doing this?
Right.
Why, the comparison.
The comparison game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when I can just pause and go, Adam, you have, a home,
Right.
you have food on the table.
Yeah.
You woke up this morning.
Exactly.
You're in a lot better position than so many others are.
Right.
Tell me how, the role gratitude plays in your life.
Oh, it's very, very, very much there. And, I share this story. My son was a missionary for 10 years. And he presently is living in Boone, North Carolina, but for 10 years he lived in Italy, he lived in Haiti, he lived in a lot of different countries, but he speaks about 5 or 6 languages. And so
Wow.
in a missions field, basically you survive on whatever you can survive on. Yes, we supported him, the church supported him, but to see the knowledge that he was able to gain from all those different sacrifices that led him to recently getting married this past January, and finding that right partner, was able to see from my perspective all the sacrifices that he looked at and did in terms of where it enabled him to get to now, even though we couldn't see the outcome of that. But it's interesting in the sense that we always have to, we can't do the compare game, but we all do it, you know. And then we have to realize that, you know, I did wake up breathing this morning, so I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You know?
And Teddy Roosevelt said it best, comparison is the thief of all joy.
Absolutely.
And, you know, that's something I have to remind myself. And it's, you know, especially in this day and age when you can just hop on your phone.
Right.
And you can compare yourself to someone living on the opposite side of the world.
Right. And sometimes
which is really,
and sometimes it's not real person. It's just
yeah. But like, which is really, if you think about it from just like a factual like perspective, you're comparing yourself to someone on the opposite side of the world,
right?
You know, who completely different circumstances. And you know nothing about them other than what you're seeing,
right? And it may not be real,
and it may not be real.
Right.
Like this is what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And you know, like, but like having these, you know, the gratitude, having the faith, and having the communities around you that humble you and know who you really are as a human being, prove to be far more valuable nowadays, I feel, than before, because there is the world can be in the palm of your hand in a minute.
Sure.
I want to talk about something that I'm sure you could talk about for hours.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask you a question. You're a grandfather. You have 3 grandkids. And everybody who I know has grandkids, that's all they want to talk about. So talk to me about that, because I know fatherhood is one thing. Being a grandfather is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate that my oldest daughter right now has 2 children, and one is 5 and one is 3. And my youngest daughter is soon to have her first child on July the 7th. At least that's the anticipated birth time. But there's nothing that you can ever describe to someone about how to be that grandfather. And for me, my name is Pop Pop on our side of the family. That's what kind of started, because the sibling of the in-laws, you know, they use the other word as far as Papa or Poppy, whatever they want to call it. So mine ended up being Pop Pop. So even though our 2 grandchildren presently that live in, 10 hours away from where we live, thank goodness for FaceTime and communications and pictures, but there's just nothing, you just can't explain the fact that when they get on the phone or you're FaceTiming and they talk about, hey, Pop Pop, you just can't take that away, It's just, until you've experienced it, it's just a joy. So we're actually going to be able to get to see them coming up here in June.
Love
we're
that.
at the beach for a week, so we're going to really enjoy that.
Oh, that's amazing.
So if you have your kids around you or grandkids around you, spend that time wisely with them, because they're all going to grow up real soon.
It's funny because, I have family in the South. I have family in South Carolina, Beaufort, South Carolina, and I love it. I love being down there, and I just love. I love living. They call it backcountry,
Right?
And I just love living like how they live, and
totally different atmosphere.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because you have those southern roots. You're originally from Tennessee, but you're very well traveled. What is it that you love the most about being home?
Well, interesting enough, being home, as we've been fortunate to build a home that we can have room for the grandkids to come and play and do their things. And yes, there was times when I traveled every week.
Yeah.
And gone for days, even when the kids were small. that's a lot of responsibility for a wife to, to maintain. So, and I didn't realize all of that until I got older as to what sacrifices that my wife had made during that particular time.
Yeah.
But everybody's life is different and you make different choices, but you have to learn to enjoy those moments when they are, because you're never guaranteed,
Yeah.
How long that's going to be there. But it's just, I'm Pop and my wife is Me. So, that's just, that's just some very, when you think of the word Pop, for me, it's like my oldest daughter makes T-shirts. And of course, she makes these T-shirts with my name on them, Pop on there, So
I love that.
Yeah. So it's really nice.
What's your favorite part about like the South though?
Well, growing up in the South, but again, I've traveled quite a bit. I've been to Connecticut, New York, Texas, Chicago, California, So I remember the first time I ever traveled to New York City. And, it was quite a few years back. But, just to look at the, the stature, all the concrete, and all of that, it was kind of like overwhelming.
Yeah.
But at times now it's like it's no big deal. You just kind of get used to it. But being able to go away, we've had a few hurricanes in Florida the last few times, and we were fortunate we didn't have any damage in the house, but we lost a bunch of trees, and the back property flooded, and in fact it's still wet right now.
I'm sorry.
But just being able to come home, sitting down with your wife or whoever the family that you're with, and just enjoying the time together. There's just nothing like that. So when I travel and I'm gone for a few days or a day or however long it is, coming home is enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because I know when I get home, doesn't mean I still don't work. It just means that, okay, I've done all my effort. I've put up with all the noise and all the activity and all the, the trains and the airplanes and the Ubers and the Lyfts and the rental cars, whatever that may be. But I know that we'll have my safe place when I get home.
Is there a part of the country that when a client's like, oh, I need you to come here, and you're like, oh?
Typically not, but one of the things I did a few years back was I have a minimum.
Oh, okay.
So if I get someone from California that calls me up, years ago I would like, okay, when am I going to go see you? Whatever. I don't do that anymore. Basically, I have a minimum order for out-of-state travel.
Yeah.
And now, if I'm seeing an individual specifically, but if I'm doing an event, that's a little different. But what happened was by doing that, I found that people that do want to see me, they value my time as much as I value theirs.
Yeah.
As opposed to, and I try not to do too many appointments on the weekend, but it does happen because, you want to service your client. But I find that you reach a point in your life to where you realize that you can really work your schedule if you commit and are willing to make the effort. You may lose a few sales. You may lose a few relationships. But in the long run, you actually be able to be more in charge of your activity.
I love that.
Like, for example, I'm supposed to go to the beach for the week, and I had a client call me up and said, can I see you on this particular day in June? I looked at my calendar, and I said, unfortunately, I'm going to be with my grandkids on that particular day. Now, years ago, I would have said, oh, hey, when you want me to see you?
Yeah.
I'll see the grandkids later. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But now it's like you realize that grandkids won't always be grandkids. They'll always be grandkids, but they won't be little anymore.
Yeah.
But that client, his life wouldn't change if I didn't see him that particular day.
Yeah.
We could always schedule another day.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about purpose.
Okay.
What does the word purpose mean to you?
Well, I think purpose basically means that you have to figure out what is your purpose in life. And most of us don't really figure that out until you're older. Now, if we can figure out the purpose of life in the beginning stage, then you may have less bumps along the road. But again, you could look at purpose as a way of, well, is my purpose to be a good father, be a good grandfather, supply food and shelter for my family? I think that's part of purpose, as a dad or a grandfather. But I think you as an individual also have to determine what is your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy task, because sometimes you think it's one thing and you find out later it's something different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's very important.
Yeah.
And you have to do a lot of soul searching to look at that, to find out. I think that's also where the mentors in your life help, because you're able to go through the whole process and eliminate some things.
If you could define your purposeful journey in one word, what would it be?
Oh, that's probably a little tough one, but I would say that as I get older, I find that my purpose, I have to find out, number one, through my God, what is my purpose? I'm an individual. There's no one that's like me in the world. And so what was my purpose here to start with? The main purpose, I think, is to glorify God. I think that's why we're here on this earth. And for me, that satisfaction in knowing that I feel like that I can be what he wants me to be. I don't always do the right thing. But again, knowing that we are here primarily with all the other stuff that goes on in our life, we were here to only worship him.
I love that. What advice would you give to someone on that journey of finding purpose?
I think you have to really do a really deep dive search. In other words, I think you have to find out not just what Webster says purpose is, but to do a little more deep dive and find out what your purpose is. Because people find purpose sometimes in different seasons of their life. They may not find it young, they may only find it old or in between. But for me, it's like seek and look, pray, meditate, if that's your way of doing things, and then just figure it out, because it is a journey.
I love that. Dudley, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to speak to the audience and just let them know how they could reach you. And I really, really enjoyed our time together. It was, yesterday at the event, amazing. Like, you put on a show. It wasn't really just a display. It was a show.
Right.
And I couldn't have done it, without you in that sense, because you added so much value to the evening, and I really, really appreciate that. But I'd love for you to talk to my audience and just kind of let them know what you have coming up next, and how they could reach you.
Okay, sure. And again, thank you for being allowing me to be part of that event as well.
It was amazing.
And I would have to say that it was, all the effort that it took for me to be here and do all the things that we have to do that. But when you're in the moment and you're seeing that the people enjoy what you're doing, they're interested in what you're doing, that's why you do the hustle and do what you do.
Yep.
So for me, but
I'm hoping you landed some clients up here, and
absolutely,
and I get to see you more.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about it now, Velo Airlines flies directly out of Lakeland into Connecticut now. So it's they only do Thursday and Sunday, but it's still a good connection.
Love it.
But for me, doing those type of events enables me to meet people, build relationships. Yes, you pick up clients at a particular point in time, but that's not why you do it.
Yeah.
You do it because you're supporting the organization in the event that you're doing, okay? Yes, you're trying to carry a message and you're going to meet people, but I want people to know that, number one, I love what I do. Not everyone can afford what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like to teach at universities, colleges, to where you are able to take young students that goes from shorts and flip-flops, now they graduate and they go into their career. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to buy. They don't know what to dress.
Yeah.
Unless they go into a university or something that gives some educational tools and whatever. So for me, it's trying to take an individual where they're at in their season of life and being the best benefit that I can be with them based on their wardrobe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer that less is more, but you have to have the right product in the less. Because I see a lot of wardrobes in terms of clients that impulsive buys, stuff that they didn't wear, stuff they can't wear anymore. So we do a wardrobe clean out, so to speak, sometimes with a particular client, find out where their really needs are, and then we go from there.
Okay.
But the best way to communicate with me is, at Sir Dudley's is my Instagram page. www.sirdudleys.com is my website. It is being redone right now, so if you go there, you're just going to see under construction. But I'm a little old-fashioned in that sense. My phone number is 863-409-0907. And that's usually the best way to communicate with me, whether it's a text message or whether it's a phone call. And for me, how can I be of benefit to someone to make their life easier and worthwhile when it comes to the wardrobe?
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I can't wait till my listeners get to hear this, because, you shared a lot about your personal story too, which I really appreciate that. Folks, if you haven't had the opportunity, I definitely recommend you subscribe to the YouTube channel. But your engagement is really what matters the most. We're able to reach a broader audience with your support, your shares, and to build this community. So I really, really, really appreciate everybody's support and allowing me to grow this community. I do want to shout out Claudio Valenzuela's Kai Visions here, who produces my studios. If you're interested also in creating content and, whether it's promoting your band or launching your podcast and you are in the New York metro area, I encourage you to either reach out to me or directly to Claudio, and we'll get you set up. Kai Visions, big smile up back there. He's here. He's watching. He's always watching. But grateful for everyone who always just shows love. So see you next time, folks.